On this episode of FieldLink, we catch up with Dr. Michael Cox to learn how Trico Pro is helping growers and landowners manage their deer populations. Plus, we recap how herbicide performance in this year's crop could impact the way we manage weed populations in the future. Finally, Jody Lawrence joins us from Nashville to discuss the commodity markets. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith, and we're sitting down with Dr. Michael Cox in Memphis, Tennessee. Michael, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, man, it's great to have you here in the studio today, and we're going to talk a little bit really about two different product lines, two areas today. The first one we're going to talk about is it's that time of season, Michael, where, we're at the end of the summer. Fall is just starting to show some hints here, and we've got a lot of folks out there that are starting to, really get out in their fields and see some things that have happened over the last summer. And, there's still a lot of growth yet in the fields, whether you're growing corn, soybeans, cotton, or even some specialty products, some nursery products, maybe some pumpkins out there. And we're starting to see some deer damage. You can really start to see things being picked apart. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Trico Pro. Michael, you launched Trico Pro, almost 2 years ago? 3 years ago now, 3 years ago. And we're really starting to see a lot of questions coming in, and customers are really excited about this product.
Yeah, absolutely. We continue to hear a lot of interest, a lot of excitement around the entire country, and a lot of different markets around this product. It continues to really perform well. And we get a lot of questions on a daily basis, and a lot of surprising questions. Even I've learned a tremendous amount, I guess, about new ways that we can use deer repellent products and different techniques. Things I've never really even thought about that deer kind of cause damage or grower woes, I guess you could call it, in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it catches me off guard. I'm like, I've never really thought about that. But Trico kind of pops in as a good tool, and I hear reports on the backside, and the growers like, hey, it really worked well for that.
Yeah.
So it's just been a growing product and real successful for us.
So let's step back just a little bit and kind of peel the onion apart here. For those listeners that are not familiar with Trico Pro, what is Trico Pro, and really what benefit does it provide the end user?
Yeah, Trico Pro, simply put, it's a deer repellent. It's a liquid concentrate of primarily a sheep fat component. It is very strictly manufactured by our supplier partner, and it just makes a really easy product. The end product is very easy to use. It's very sprayable, meaning it doesn't cause you a lot of issues with your spray equipment like some products in the market do, repellent-wise. A lot of those other products can be really clumpy.
Right.
They can clog your screens, your spray nozzles, your lines. They're not easy to pour. A lot of them are just kind of harsh on a human nose, to say the least. A lot of capsaicin-based products or egg solids, really rotten smells. Trico doesn't have that effect. Trico, to a human, you really can't smell it at all with a human nose, but it is potent in smell and definitely taste to deer, elk, moose, ungulate type species. So user-friendly wise to us as humans is great. It's like the best of both worlds.
Right.
It's not obnoxious to us, but it is to the deer, which is what we're trying to repel. So from all angles, all factors of usability of the product, it checks all the boxes, and it's the best that we've ever seen. And that's why we launched it as our HPG brand Trico Pro, because we saw the potential of it being different and better than all the rest.
Michael, in my seat on the bus, I receive tremendous emails from across really the country, really all over North America and around the world, and questions about Trico Pro all the time, and different folks that are wanting to use it, whether it be a homeowner, soybean growers. Everybody's really asking about Trico Pro because deer are very devastating, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're hearing more and more about that. I think the communication lines are wider, and those stories and the feedback and the accounts from people, especially in the row crop world, but also in specialty crops as well, are always talking about deer damage and what can we do to prevent this. It's really starting to get into our pockets, and our return on the investment of the crop. And predation or using, means such as that is not always the best option. It doesn't always work for everybody around the country, especially if you're in city limits or
near city limits or restricted areas.
Right.
There's so many factors.
So something like Trico Pro is easy to use, and it's effective, and you just trying to keep them out of the target crop.
Right.
And as development happens in urban areas, especially, we start to encroach more into their territory and their home. They're becoming more used to humans, and they will encroach into our area, and they're going to find what tastes good, and especially in certain times of the year. The heat of the summer, in the middle of the summer, palatable food sources are not as abundant, and if you've got a tasty little young soybean crop coming up, that may be more tasty to them than something that they'll find in their natural wood lot. So, there's a lot of things to consider: deer pressure, deer densities, available food sources outside of what you're growing, that can attract them or lack thereof.
Right.
Just a lot of things in general you have to consider, and the more that we get involved in and around these areas, I think the more we're going to continue to see this problem. So we've got to come up with good solutions to counteract that. Yeah.
Well, Michael, we've talked about Trico Pro in the past, and some of the best practices. You referenced soybeans. Soybeans, cotton are two very common products, or crops rather, that certainly can benefit from Trico Pro in heavy infested areas for deer. In application timing, is that usually pretty early, and as those crops get up there, they're not as impacted, but that's not true for all crops. Fall is still a great time for Trico Pro for a lot of different types of crops, correct?
Yeah. Especially in our what we call our specialty markets, our turf and ornamental, Christmas trees, forestry. That's really in the fall and winter. That's the time of the year that we really start to concentrate more on those particular crop markets. Christmas trees, we're in August now. I think some of the extreme heat is started to leave us in the last week or two, and I think people are beginning to start thinking about fall, pumpkin patches, Christmas tree farms. Yeah,
school's getting back in class.
School's back in. Yeah, the stores are putting out Halloween decorations. Here we go. So, not just the field and the Halloween or holiday timings, but thinking about the time of the year and what's going on out in the environment and in these particular locations. Deer and what the deer are doing. So this is about deer and elk and moose, right? So as we get into fall, we also get into the time of year where they're starting to feed on woody vegetation, trees, because a lot of the green herbaceous type plants, thinking like soybean or shrubbery type plants, those are mature, they're hardened off. The heat of the summer has kind of kicked them into survival mode, and most of them are either going to die or go into dormancy. The woodies kind of come into play, and then you think about deer rubbing. So they'll start rubbing their antlers on the bark and on the trunks of these trees. We're thinking forestry, Christmas tree applications now. With Christmas trees, you've got to protect that tree every day for its entire life cycle, right? There is no grow back from rubbing the trunk. The Christmas tree, its value is in keeping it healthy and beautiful from the time it's put into the ground until we cut it for Christmas.
Wow.
So it's very important. Timing's critical. Efficacy and performance of the product is critical because you get one crack at it, and that tree's either going to make it or it's not going to make it. Forestry's the same way. You know, they plant these things on mountainsides in the Pacific Northwest, and you walk away from it, and it's in a remote area. It's got to survive on its own for 6 months to a year. People aren't just visiting those sites very often. So Trico has become a big product for that because the efficacy does last a long time, and you can be assured that your tree is protected when you walk away from it for extended periods of time, and that the deer and the elk are going to go elsewhere to feed because they just don't want to be around the smell and taste of this product.
You know, Michael, definitely a Trico Pro is a great product for forestry and Christmas trees, as you mentioned as well. We've also spoke with a customer the other day from Northwest Iowa that raises pumpkins. And you mentioned falls here, it's pumpkin time, but right now is when that high level production is happening for those kinds of crops. Trico Pro is pretty awesome for that type of crop as well.
Yeah, we hear feedback and reports from those growers as well throughout the year over the last couple of years. Vegetables in general, some of these cucurbits, like those type crops, pretty popular with deer. They like to eat pumpkins, and it's just a great product. I've heard plenty of stories of them using Trico for pumpkins and similar crops, and it's done a great job. So yeah, it's definitely something that's versatile and can be used across a very wide variety of crops and situations. And turf and ornamental the same way. I mean, golf courses or residential commercial landscapes, deer love hostas and roses and azaleas and you name it. Across the country, there are plants that deer will demolish in these landscapes, commercial or residential landscapes type situations. And so Trico is very, very good for protecting those as well.
What's really nice about Trico is it's extremely safe.
Yeah.
It's not just, it doesn't stink or smell. You mentioned ease of handling. It's super easy from that perspective, but it's really, really safe for both the deer as well as the user.
Yeah. Yeah. There are some things to take note of on the label. There's re-entry intervals that we have to put on the label, but typically those intervals it's not because if you were to go into that area where it was treated in that period of time, it's not going to cause a lot of damage to you or health problems. It's not because of that. It's more or less a lot of reasons sometimes is just to let the product dry. And that way you're not contacting what it was applied to. And a lot of, it's always conservative. On a label, we're going to go on the conservative side. Right. So it's not necessarily a live or die situation, but it's just kind of cautious to let the product do its job.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's great. And we've talked a lot about a lot of applications with Trico Pro, but one area that I know we've had a ton of interest this year and even the last year or so, but you and I went out to Mark Rose, who is a professional bass fisherman, and we helped him out a little bit with his deer plots, establishing those plots for feed, and Trico Pro has worked pretty good for him.
Yeah. Mark, he plants those forage soybeans, which are pretty popular for deer hunters. They plant in the spring, and forage soybeans put on just a lot of biomass compared to a conventional bean. And so they're real popular for deer hunters, and the deer love soybeans, obviously, and high protein source. So the problem is in the spring is getting those soybeans to a stage where it can tolerate deer feeding, and it doesn't kill your crop. You want it to produce forage for the deer. So to do that, you can apply Trico Pro shortly after planting. and get it on a little bit of green foliage and protect that plant, let it get up enough growth stage or height so when the deer come in and start feeding, they don't demolish the crop back down to the soil line. And that's what Mark is doing. He's also doing it with corn, and that's worked really well for him. So, yeah, we hope he maybe gets a lot of luck this fall and winter on his soybean patch from the summer.
Yeah, in his case, he's raising feed for the deer, for later throughout the summer and fall. Getting that early start is really critical, and Trico Pro has been a great asset in those deer prots. What does the future look like for Trico Pro? I mean, there's lots of different applications. Anything new in the horizon in that area?
Yeah, we're always looking for ways to improve or create some more edge for a product, a little more innovation, and we're into some discussions, and I've had some conversations with folks within Helena across the country in the field, just looking for ideas of ways that maybe we could attempt at improving even more that product, or just different ways to differentiate it even more than just being a deer repellent. What'll make it last longer, or I don't know, a lot of different things, a lot of different discussions.
Yeah. Innovation never stops, right?
Right. But I'd say over the last year, I think there's been a lot of new techniques or ways of using the product that's been identified by some of our product managers and sales folks that have been out there kind of on the front lines seeing it. And we've noticed, different rate structures for certain situations. Maybe it's not a one rate fits all approach.
Right.
It's, in fact, we've got some 2EE labels that we've put into place for Trico Pro that really get into reduced use rates. So something like a quart or 2 quarts per acre, where it still gives you multiple weeks of repellency. Maybe you want to kind of stripe the field with it. Make a pass, skip a pass, make a pass, skip, something like that, or even a complete broadcast application with a lower rate, as opposed to a perimeter only application. Some people like to use a perimeter, one pass around the perimeter of the field, and that works for some people, and some people need more coverage across the field. So you can adjust once you learn your deer on your farm and what they respond the best to. You can manipulate the rate structure to best fit your location.
Yeah,
and that's really been, I think, the last year has been kind of interesting to see how those rate structures kind of form themselves.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. It's not an exact science because deer pressure vary significantly. I know here at the Agri Center here in Memphis, we've been told that our deer pressure is 7x of what it is throughout the rest of the state of Tennessee, just because of how the rivers come together. We're inside the city of Memphis technically, so they can't be harvested, and we have an amazing tributary system into the Mississippi River where there's plenty of water. And right here at the Agri Center and all the research fields, we got a lot of feed and no pressure. So we're going to have 7x. So our rates are significantly to be different here than they might be in, western Kansas or Wisconsin or Georgia, depending upon where you're at.
Yes, absolutely. We see a lot of differences across the country. Some people can get 4 to 5 weeks repellency from a quart per acre. Well, you go across the state line, and another grower, he may get a half a week from a quart. He may need a full gallon per acre.
Right.
It just depends on a lot of factors: adjacent food sources, deer density per square mile, all of those things. A lot of things just factor in.
Right, definitely. But the good news is Trico Pro has been working awesome. We've had great feedback from producers across all of the United States, and we continue to do our best to keep it on the shelves. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a task just trying to predict and project where it's going to go, but we're optimistic. We're seeing great results from it, and we're very optimistic and looking forward to the future of it and the growth.
Great. Michael Cox, we're going to take a little break here. We're going to come back in just a moment after this commercial and talk to you about herbicides. This is the other area that you get to manage. So we'll be right back. August and September is a great time of year to best evaluate how your hybrids are performing on your farm. Join the Helena Seed Team in Rochester, Minnesota for the Farm Journal Yield Academy on Thursday, October 21st, sponsored by Helena. Come and learn about Helena's future plots and how this information can help build your seed strategy for next season. Be sure to ask your Helena representative to learn more about future plots to see one close to you. Be sure to ask a Helena representative about a future plot that is close to you. Okay, we're going to welcome back Dr. Michael Cox. He's sitting in here in Memphis in the FieldLink Podcast studio. We just had a good chat about Trico Pro and how Trico Pro is doing some amazing things for customers throughout the United States here this year. Michael, you're also responsible for herbicides, or some of the herbicides here at Helena. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role there?
Yeah, so I handle, I guess you could call it half of the herbicide portfolio. So Mark Whalen and myself are the herbicide brand managers, and I specifically manage the corn herbicide portfolio and range and pasture and specialty, so the TNO, IVM, aquatic product lines as well. And we kind of bounce back and forth and help one another. Sometimes I may work with Mark some on burn down products or soybean or cereal grain, because my first 7 years here at HPG, I was in the research and development department, and I worked on Mark's brands.
On his products.
As our research and development. So we've had a long history. Pretty much my entire Helena career has been working with Mark. So we're a good duo when it comes to developing herbicides. And so now I just get the pleasure of managing some of those from the business aspect as well as the development aspect of them.
Well, we're sitting here, as we mentioned, as we're recording this podcast in August, and throughout the summer, we have the luxury of having the Innovative Research Center here on campus, and with that includes our R&D research plots, where we can really get our hands on some unique herbicides and other products too from other categories of the business, but in your case, herbicides, and kind of get a look at some things. And I guess, before we get too far deep into it today, Michael, what are some walkaways and some things that I guess are important that you've learned this summer as we've taken a look at, herbicides and really just weed pressure across the board?
Yeah, weed pressure across the board this year was, I think, pretty high. Just generally speaking, rainfall was heavy. In a lot of the areas of the country, and in areas that were not flooded out completely, with the ones you would consider just, I guess, abundant rainfall amounts.
Sure.
Well, the crop looks good, but that also promotes weed germination and high weed pressures, densities. So I think this year in a lot of areas it probably tested the efficacy and the longevity of these pre-emergence applications. I think last year in a lot of areas we were talking about lack of rainfall activation with pre's, and that can be good and bad because less rainfall means generally less weed germination.
Sure.
But it also means less activation of your herbicide. So there's some fine lines in there between the weed germination versus the activation of the herbicide, and there's a sweet spot and some fine lines in there that it's like playing a chess match sometimes with weeds, So this year I think it was different. I think we got plenty of activation. If you could get into the field and make a timely application, which is number one key, timely applications. Well, then if you got activation and a timely rainfall after the application, now it's a battle of what herbicide actives and what modes of action work the best. What were our weed pressures, our weed species, and then what did we apply and how did that perform? did we overlay our residuals, so to speak? That's kind of the name of the game now, is make sure you put some residual chemistry in, even in that early post application. Don't leave it just post emergence. You got to keep stacking those residual chemistries into that soil bank to it's a zero tolerance approach. We don't want to kill the weed when it's 4 or 5 inches tall. Right. We want to kill it at 2 inches or less.
Yeah, earlier the better, right?
The earlier the better. Yeah. So there's a tactic that you need to implement, and that starts with the pre-emergence, cleaning the field up at burn down, but then preventing as much weed pressure on after germination as possible. And so I think this year was a battle of moisture. How much moisture did we get? Was it just right? Was it just enough to activate and everything looked great? Or was it too much in certain areas? Did we miss our timely application?
Right.
And is our weed pressure, outlasting our pre-application? So I think that's just some things to think about, and gives us more opportunity to tune our approach, our management strategy. Make us better. We see it in dry years. We see it in wet years. But I think it's always important to factor in the environment and those weather conditions before we start scrutinizing the chemistries. And I think sometimes I hear that sometimes, where maybe we get a little too quick to say, well, that chemistry's not working anymore. That herbicide's not working like it used to. Well, was it applied at the right time when it should be? Was it activated by rainfall? If it's a post, was it applied to weeds that were too large?
Yep.
Let's really be fair about it and do our part in the cultural management game, and not just be so quick to throw a chemistry under the bus. Stewardship is our job.
It really is. And to your point, this was a challenging year with a lot of moisture, and weed seed growth is just huge this year. I mean, as you travel around, there's a fair amount of dirty fields out there.
Yeah,
and some of those fields, some are awesome, by the way, and some look pretty rough. Just timing, Mother Nature, may not necessarily be the herbicide. It could be a lot of other things going on. I think it also highlights, some other things we've often talked about on this podcast, of making sure that your herbicide, whatever it is, your pre-herbicide is aligned with the right adjuvant. And we talk a lot about grounded here on the FieldLink podcast, having grounded whatever pre-emergent has, just especially in a year like this, where we can ensure that we're trying to keep that, that active ingredient in the top few inches in that seed bed area is always a good practice as well.
Yeah. Placement and timing are the two key points to remember on these applications, because if those are not done correctly, you've kind of lost before you've started.
Yeah.
It's a lost cause if you're not setting up the chemistry to do what it does best. If you're not setting it up to succeed, then it's not the herbicide's fault. It's our fault.
Right.
And sometimes we can't help it. Sometimes
Mother Nature,
right. But we try to do our best.
Well, you said something really important, I think, that a lot of our staff and producers, now's a great time. Now is a great time, August, September, early October, pre-harvest, to really get out in your fields and kind of walk around and take a deep breath and take a notebook and go, okay, what did we use? When did we use it? How did we apply it? What's that moisture like? What kind of weed pressure am I seeing? What worked well? What didn't work well? Can we kind of review while we're visually still looking at that crop versus trying to take, I guess, an inventory after harvest? Now's a great time to be out there.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Not only just thinking about our yield and our mind wrapped around the end game there, but we need to be trying to pay attention to, are we noticing any new weed species on our farm that we haven't seen in the past?
Right.
Which may cause you to adjust or change your strategy for next year. Maybe you need to bring in a new herbicide that you've never used before.
Sure.
To be effective on that new pressure, that new weed species. Also, what are the common things? What are the same weed species we've been seeing or we've been dealing with? Are we still getting the same level of control? factoring in weather and moisture and all of those factors, are we still getting the level of control we expect to get? And if we're not, why was that? Was it timing, or do you think maybe there is some resistance forming? There definitely could be, especially in some of these pigweed species and other weeds. But yeah, I mean, it's time to notice the details and getting out in front of those potential future problems before they really get the best of us and cause us to do, some emergency applications or things that we know is probably against best management practices. Let's try to head that off as soon as we can, and then try to clean that field up and think about maybe fall burn downs.
Yep.
Let's start thinking about next spring. Where do we need to end this season? What do our fields need to look like? Do we need to start implementing other integrated pest management practices like cover crops or a different type of tillage? All these things just to set us up for long-term strategy on the farm. It's not necessarily just about managing this year's field, this year farm. It's next year and the year after and the year after, because they're not just creating new herbicides, every day. And I think everyone's aware of that. So we have got to steward these chemistries because they're not being developed as quick as some of these weeds are burning through them.
Well, and I think a little of that goes back to, we've talked about this on our podcast in the past. We've kind of grown up in the last 20 years or so of, I call it the Roundup era, where, if all else fails, boom, we've got that opportunity to come in and save the day. We're starting to evolve away from that and not getting quite the control that we once had. So it's forcing us as an industry to go back to some of those base molecules that frankly were really good, still are really good. And we have to look at those as opportunities and how to position them uniquely.
Yeah. Some of the old strategies, what's old becomes new again.
Right.
And I think we're definitely getting away from the Roundup era, where everything is, you spray it when you see it, post only, which, that's a nice little era to live in for a while, but it's not a smart approach to long-term weed management. And I think we've got to recalibrate ourselves in a way too, where some of the things that we, or not we, but some of the guys, in 30, 40 years ago when they were controlling weeds, maybe they could tolerate a little burn on some lower leaves in the canopy of the soybean. Right. They knew that their rate was dialed in when they saw a little burn on the lower leaves, which didn't cause a yield reduction, but they knew they were right. You get into the Roundup era and people see any injury on a crop and they don't really know how to handle that. Right. They're scared and what did I do wrong? So things like that, recalibrating to use these older effective chemistries that maybe cause us a little visual discomfort at times, but it's not yield reducing. Maybe that's where we got to get back to. But as long as they're effective on the weeds and, the overall yield is where it needs to be and where it should be, then at least we're doing something right,
Michael, you talked a little bit about, not coming out with so many molecules and new chemistries as often as we once did. And that's extremely true for the last 15 years or so, or 20 years even. That's not always the case here at the Helena Products Group, though. You're continuously looking to innovate and bring new products that can solve solutions, in this case, herbicides that can solve solutions for producers, aren't you?
Yeah. Here at the Helena Products Group, we're looking more at different combinations. So we're not synthesizing new active ingredients, which takes a long time, many years to do that, and we're not doing that here at Helena. But what we are looking for is new ways to put existing combinations together, and maybe putting some things into a mixture that have not been mixed before. A better formulation, making that product more efficient.
Yeah,
things that just streamline and improve the whole application process to creating new products, new brands. So it's trying to just improve what we have by being a little more creative about how we put it all together.
And you said something really powerful there that I think a lot of listeners may or may not understand fully is, yes, we're taking different molecules, we're putting different rates and mixtures together, different approaches, but the secret sauce is the formulation side, and that's what we do so well here at Helena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Formulation is vital to the product. If your product doesn't mix well with typical carriers, water, liquid fertilizer, or getting a little deeper, you start talking about what is it going in the tank with, another herbicide, another fungicide, nutritional, adjuvant. In a lot of situations today, there's a lot more product than there is carrier, water in the tank. So compatibility is of the utmost importance in the world today, because the actual output of a spray is very low. And then out of that low volume, there's more product than water to keep it in sprayable solution. So compatibility is getting even more important every day than it has been. And we always work to improve on compatibilities, and the sprayability is what we call it, of products, to make sure it's user-friendly and it performs well.
Michael, you have the unique luxury to working with many researchers here at the Helena Products Group, as well as third-party researchers from across the country, and you guys are looking at different herbicides for multiple crops all the time. Give our listeners kind of an idea of size and scope of what you're looking at and where you're looking at them and what might be in the future.
Yeah, right now we've got several different product concepts in the pipeline in our development portfolio and what we're testing in the field. Me specifically, I've probably got 3 or 4 corn herbicide combinations that I'm looking at. We have been looking at them for a couple of years. Some of them are a little further along than others. Some of them are getting ready to go into the regulatory process. Others are still in the herbicide ratio development part of the phase. We've got a great research and development team, our tech development managers, that set these products up in trials versus a lot of different industry standards that are out there, the best performers in the industry today, and we put our products up against those to make sure that we're going to offer the best to the grower. Sure. And that's a tall order. That's a tough task because everybody makes great products out there, so taking great and making it better is tough to do, but that's our goal, and that's what we're doing. And so we've just got a lot of things in the pipeline. I've got a lot of range and pasture mixtures going, and Mark's got a lot going on the soybean side and cereal grain, wheat market stuff. So we've got a lot of things in the pipeline, but it takes time, and it takes a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of PowerPoint slides, and lab discussions to get these things ready for commercialization.
I know you guys are running all over the country this time of year looking at trials with third party, and I think that's also important to point out, third party researchers. Yeah. These are not just Helena researchers. Yeah. We're leaning on outside source to ground truth, right?
Yeah.
Performance.
Yeah. I mean, we want unbiased professionals in the agronomic world to evaluate these products, and we code them. We have an internal code system that we put on these mixtures, so we know what the treatments are. But when they're evaluated in the field by these third-party researchers, they don't know what they're really looking at, so they can't have a biased approach to the ratings either. It's kind of just a double protection layer, and they rate them out and give us the data back, and then we put it into our internal system and analyze it through statistical analyses and take out all the human factor in the data. And so, I mean, it's put through the gamut of analyses to make sure that the product does what we want it to do and what we say it's going to do. And if it doesn't, then we put it to the back, and it's probably going to be deleted off the list, and we keep going forward. So
yeah, it's a general rule at Helena Products Group. We're not going to bring something forward if it's not going to perform better that's on the market today. It's got to be the same as or better and deliver more research ROI to that grower. Save
Correct.
time, money, all the above.
Correct. That's our approach to the and our commitment to the grower is to give them the best. And there's a time and place for all levels of performance and price and everything else
Sure.
that you can look at with products. There's a time and place for all of them, and our approach is really keying in on that top level premium product for the grower that's looking for that type of performance. That's what we're trying to develop, is that top performing product.
That's great.
It's just going to give them the best of all the characteristics of a product.
Well, I don't want to disclose too much, but speaking of top performing products, you've got some exciting news probably going to be announced here in about another 60 days or so, don't you?
Yeah. So in September, we're getting ready to announce some new products for commercialization for mostly 2026 sales and beyond. And we're excited. I've got a new corn herbicide brand that I'm looking to launch here in a couple of weeks, and we're really excited. I mean, it's showed outstanding results in the field and weed control and performance, and it's really brought a new flavor to our portfolio, because our existing line, our Empiros line of corn herbicides, is really based on HPPD chemistries, topyrolate, which is an outstanding herbicide for corn. And this new brand is kind of implementing a different set of modes of action there, that in a different combination that's going to offer us a little more well-rounded approach to timings in the crop, as well as crop rotation intervals. A lot more generous crop rotation intervals than some of the other chemistries we have. So a lot of reasons to be excited about launching that brand in the future of it.
Well, our listeners, now that we've teased them, they're going to have to pay attention to the FieldLink podcast to learn more here. Really, in about a month and a half, 2 months, to learn more about that brand that's going to be introduced to the marketplace, and we're excited about that particular product. Dr. Michael Cox, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink as we cover both a couple unique products that you're working on, Trico Pro, and of course your entire herbicide portfolio.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. It's been great. As always, I enjoy talking about what we're doing and the excitement behind what we're trying to bring to the grower here.
I want to thank everybody for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. And joining us from Nashville, commodity guest Jody Lawrence. Jody, welcome back to FieldLink.
Hey, Bill, good to be back here. Quick 2 weeks since we recorded the last one. And although, what's the old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we're pretty much in the same narrative that we were 2 weeks ago, even though we have passed the August 1st tariff deadline date. There were a handful of deals put together with some important allies, but not the major ones. We're still optimistic that with the tariffs being hinted at, that they're going to, or the 90-day tariff extension for China, that something is in the works. And when we get later in the summer or early fall, maybe they will have worked out the framework for something, for some trade deal, whether it's a return to a watered down phase one from 2019 or something else. But what I think has been noticeable so far in all the trade deals, that they are not, unfortunately, agriculture heavy. They have had agriculture paragraphs and certain, I guess you would call it,
kind of referenced, right? I mean, highlighted, but to your point, we're talking countries like South Korea, Japan, and the EU. But to your point, they're not huge consumers of a lot of agriculture products like other countries.
Right. And we need China and India on board. And that really is the big two that are remaining, even though there was some positive news last week from President Sheinbaum and President Trump's conversation, we did not see anything or hear any rumors over the weekend that they were close to a deal. But we'll see. We're a tweet away from saying something has been announced. But the big thing with Mexico to not so much expand their use, because they buy about 90%, 85, 90% of their corn from us. Just make sure we don't lose it to South America.
Yeah, that's right.
And that sounds like a very defeatist way to say it when you're just trying to tread water with a major importer. But I think that's just kind of where we've gotten to in this cycle with the competition from Brazil and Argentina.
Yeah, very competitive marketplace right now, especially on the global front. Argentina and certainly Brazil, certainly getting their share, fair share, if you want to call it that, across the marketplace. Jody, let's talk a little bit about some recent news here. Kind of shift a little bit to the general economy. I mean, we're seeing some numbers coming out last week. As far as job reports, how's that looking?
Friday's job report, or all the economic reports, and they were about jobs, the general health of the U.S. economy, and a couple inflation numbers, showed that the U.S. economy certainly is cooling off a little bit, even though the Dow, all the equity indexes were making new contract highs, new all-time highs last week. The job market and inflation, really, those numbers are pointing towards we will get probably at least 1 quarter point rate cut in the interest rate before the end of the year. And if the numbers continue to show somewhat of a contraction in the U.S. economy, we may get a half point. So that's positive, because we're just in a spot that interest expense is just another thing that adds to all your expenses. And if we can cut it just by a little bit, it's one more thing to help. So, and another one that we saw is that OPEC came out in a little bit of a surprise news, considering that crude oil was in the mid 60s per barrel, came in and decided to raise their daily production levels, and crude was down, $1.50 most of the day. So if energy prices are coming down, and that certainly would help lower the inflation risks. And if the inflation risks go down, then lower crude and lower interest rates should be something that we see kind of settle in for the rest of the year. While it's not the most bullish thing that we could be talking about, it is a helpful factor, because we have to look at everything this year to be able to make every ends meet. And those two things should be saving us some money.
Jody, you mentioned it, OPEC, increase that production, which was kind of like, we're all kind of scratching our heads there. Do you feel that, the demand is taking off, or why do you think they did that?
It's really hard to say, because it's completely counterintuitive. Everything that you read from every major economist and every other kind of World Bank, they're really bashing these tariffs, saying that it's going to slow down world economic growth and the entire world economy. And if OPEC thinks the world is in the same boat with everybody else and thinks the world economy is going to slow, there'd be no reason to increase production, because energy use is always higher in a growing economy, and it's always weaker in a contracting economy. So, yeah, that one's a little bit of a head scratcher, but somebody must need the money, because they never produce more of it if they're not making money somewhere.
Right. Certainly a head scratcher there for sure. Hey, Jody, let's talk a little bit about the crop progress, getting some reports in. We're seeing some harvest numbers starting to come in the very, very, very far south of Texas and Louisiana. But crop progress across the country is moving right along.
Yeah, let's just start. The numbers just came out about 20 minutes ago. Corn condition across the major 18 states. And those 18 states, a lot of people, this may be just kind of a helpful reminder. When we talk about all the conditions in the Monday report from the USDA, they are taking sample numbers from 18 states that account for 92% of all the planted corn acres. And while you have the big ones that we look at, the big I states, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and I'm certainly not intentionally leaving anybody out, but as you go down the list, you look at it, and this week, the corn conditions stayed the same at 73% from last week. Everybody's expecting, just seasonally, this is the time it starts to look a little worse and people psychologically start to cut it, even though the crop is still great. But the big one is, let's just look at Illinois. Illinois' crop is rated 85% good to excellent in this report. Now, there are a lot of people I talk to who don't totally disagree with this, but they disagree with it because you've had green snap and too much rain in southwest Iowa. I know there was some derecho level winds in northeast Iowa and southern Minnesota and a little bit of Wisconsin last week. So that's a head scratcher a little bit to me, that we have not seen Iowa's overall corn ratings dip a little bit, because it's not Goldilocks perfect all over the state. But 73%, considering that last year we saw a record yield when the crop was rated 67%. While I'm not holding out that these ratings are gospel, they do give an indication what everybody's seeing. Beans are moving right along. 85% of them are blooming. So you're going to go from blooming to setting pod in some of the coolest temperatures that we've seen all summer, which is going to be, almost ideal. Everybody could use some more rain. It has dried out a little bit before the crops are completely done. But when you just look across the board at this, 69% good to excellent for the soybean crop. Last year, we had a really strong yield just below trend line, and it was rated 68%. So you've got both corn and beans going into critical end of life cycle. How big the yield's going to be phases, and the weather, honestly looks just about perfect, at least for the next 10 days. And there can everything can change and be some late August heat, but the market is not going to react to that, even if it's 3 weeks from now, as this window begins to shut on how much damage we can do to the crop. The biggest thing coming up is going to be next Tuesday's USDA August report, and that is the first report of the year where they actually have boots on the ground going out and counting ears and rows and bean pod numbers, just like we'll see on the Pro Farmer Crop Tour that comes immediately after that in the middle of the month, and many other private tours. So you've got, things are going well, but you certainly have a couple speed bumps that everybody needs to be paying attention to, that we could get, hopefully some interesting bullish developments out of, to be able to price some grain in.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely the crop looks really good as you travel across much of the nation. Certainly there's some pockets here and there that look the best, but overall, boy, things look pretty darn good. And to your point, Jody, this weather kind of cooled off across most of the Midwest this past week, and people are getting a little bit of a breather, and that's certainly helping out the crops as a lot of things, as the crop's moving along. Jody, you mentioned the crop tour. The crop tour is going to be taking place here coming soon, here in a couple weeks. And Helena's going to be at the first ever Yield Academy, held in conjunction with the crop tour in Rochester, Minnesota. So folks, if you're listening there and you're in the Rochester area, be sure to stop in and listen to the Helena folks there. Learn a little bit more about the Yield Academies. We introduce the future plots from the Helena seed side of our business. So we're excited to introduce that new brand to the marketplace in conjunction with the crop tour. So Jody, thanks for your time today as we cover a lot of information here on the FieldLink Podcast, talking about the grain markets.
Okay, Bill, good to talk to you again, and everybody pay attention and have some orders in if you need to sell any bushels ahead of next Tuesday's USDA report, because it always seems to have a lot of volatility associated.
Certainly a high chance of volatility this year. Jody, thanks for joining us from Nashville.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Be sure to ask your Helena representative about Trico Pro and how it can help protect your crops from pesky deer. And be sure to join us on October 21st in Rochester, Minnesota for the Farm Journal Yield Academy to learn about Helena's future plot system.